$78. That was the entire sum of Aria Sinclair's survival, folded into the pocket of a coat so thin the November wind cut straight through it like a blade. She didn't feel the cold anymore. The body stops feeling pain when pain becomes permanent. The trash bin was industrial steel, dented from years of violence against it, abandoned in the alley behind the San Francisco warehouse district where the city forgot to install streetlights. Aria had walked past it 1,000 times during her midnight routes home from the Whitfield mansion, but tonight something made her stop. Tonight the wind carried a sound that didn't belong to wind. A sound like breaking glass. A sound like a child's whimper, so faint she thought her exhausted mind had invented it. She stood frozen at the mouth of the alley. Snow swallowed the world. The blizzard had turned visibility to nothing, transformed the city into a black void punctuated by the howl of wind that tore through the narrow space between buildings. 11:47 at night. The clock on the warehouse read it in neon that flickered like a dying heartbeat. There it was again. A whimper. Unmistakable now. Unmistakably human. Unmistakably small. Aria's hand shook as she moved toward the trash bin. Not from cold. From terror. From the knowledge that whatever she found in that steel coffin would change something irreversible inside her. She could still turn around. She could still walk home to her converted closet in the Whitfield house and pretend she heard nothing. She could still survive. Her fingers found the lip of the metal lid. It screeched as it opened, a sound that cut through the wind like a knife through silence. The smell hit her first, garbage and rot and something else, something floral and wrong, like expensive perfume mixed with animal fear. And then she saw her. A child, maybe 5 years old, no more than 6, curled in the center of a pile of restaurant waste and broken glass. The girl wore a dress of white lace now soaked through, and over it a coat of pure cashmere, the kind Aria would see hanging in the Whitfield mansion closets, untouched, priceless. The cashmere did nothing for the child. Her lips were blue. Her skin had taken on the white-gray color of a thing already leaving the world. Aria didn't think. Thinking was a luxury only the secure could afford. She reached into the trash bin and lifted the child out with hands that knew how to be gentle because gentleness was all she had ever given. The small body weighed almost nothing, was becoming nothing as Aria wrapped her own threadbare coat around the cashmere and held her against her chest. She could feel the child's heartbeat against her ribs, could feel how fast it was beating, could feel how fragile it was, like a bird's heart captured in a cage of bone. "It's okay," Aria whispered, though nothing was okay, nothing would ever be okay again. "I have you. I have you now." The child's eyes opened. They were dark brown, like polished chestnuts, and they held the expression of someone who had seen something no 5-year-old should see. The girl's lips moved. One word came out, barely audible beneath the scream of wind. "Papa." Aria looked around the alley. Empty. Nothing but snow and darkness and the metal walls of buildings that had heard 10,000 terrible things and remained silent. She held the child closer, feeling the tremors run through the small body like aftershocks. Meanwhile, 6 blocks away in a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a building that cast its shadow over 3 city blocks, Aleandro Caruso was receiving the phone call that would burn the city to the ground. He stood at floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked San Francisco like a general surveying a battlefield. Storm clouds had turned the sky the color of a bruise. The man himself was imposing, 6'3", built broad across the shoulders in the way of someone who had come up through violence and never quite left it behind. His hair was black, shot through with silver at the temples, pushed back from a face that had been broken and reassembled enough times that scars mapped the geography of his rise to power. A white scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, thin as a razor cut. His suit was charcoal, tailored, worn open at the collar to show dark hair and a chest that had not known softness in 20 years. Gold rings on his fingers. A watch on his wrist that cost more than most houses. Cashmere coat draped over the back of a leather chair, waiting for him to step outside into the storm. Rocco entered without knocking. Rocco never knocked. Rocco was the oldest of Aleandro's men, grey at the temples, built like a stone wall, wearing a charcoal suit identical to his boss's. Behind him came Pietro, younger, sharper, with eyes that missed nothing and a loyalty that had been tested and proven. "She's gone," Rocco said. His voice was the voice of a man bringing news that could not be brought, should not be brought, but had to be brought. "We've searched the house. We've searched the grounds. We've searched the car. She's gone." Aleandro didn't move. His hand remained steady against the glass, palm flat, fingers spread. When he spoke, his voice came out like venom, like something toxic and ancient. "How long?" 2 hours. Maybe less. The nanny said she put Emma down for her nap at 3 o'clock. She checked at 3:45 and the crib was empty. The window was open. Emma. The name was a fist closing around his heart. Emma, who was not yet 6 years old. Emma, who had his eyes and her mother's darkness. Emma, who was the only living thing Aleandro Caruso had ever loved without conditions, without the taint of violence and business corrupting what it touched. He turned from the window. His face was a stone mask, but his eyes were burning with something that his men had learned to fear more than anything else. Not rage. Rage was controlled, could be directed, could be used. This was something deeper. This was the expression of a man who had spent his entire life ensuring that no child would suffer the way he had suffered, and now his own daughter had slipped through his fingers like water. "Black SUVs," he said. Not a question. A command. "I want every street covered. I want every camera in the city pulled and analyzed. I want the police department on alert. No, scratch that, I want them out of the way. They'll only interfere. I want our people everywhere. Every hospital, every clinic, every place a frightened person would take a child." Pietro was already on his phone. "And Rocco," Aleandro said, and his oldest lieutenant looked at him. "Find out who knew about the nanny's schedule. Find out who knew she was vulnerable. Someone took my daughter from the safest place in the city. That doesn't happen by accident." Rocco nodded and turned to leave, already moving into action. Aleandro stood alone at the window as the storm intensified outside. Snow began to fall, fat flakes that obscured the city in white. Somewhere down there, in that white darkness, his daughter was cold and terrified and crying for him. And he was standing here. Standing here. Standing here, unable to move, unable to act, unable to do the one thing his entire life had been designed to do, protect the things he loved. The phone on his desk buzzed. A private line. A line that only certain people had. He looked at it for 2 seconds, and then he picked it up. "Caruso," he said. The voice on the other end was male, older, amused in the way of a man who held all the power. "I have something of yours. Something very precious. And I'm going to need a conversation about how you conduct your business if you ever want to see her alive again." Aleandro's hand tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "You can call me Douglas. Douglas Hale. And before you do anything stupid, you should know that I have 6 men in position around the city. The moment you move against me, the moment you so much as breathe in the wrong direction, those men will make sure your daughter disappears completely. She'll become the kind of missing that doesn't have endings. Do you understand me?" The line went dead. In the alley behind the warehouse, Aria was moving. She had lifted the child from the trash bin and wrapped her in every layer of clothing she owned, which was not much, which was barely enough, which would have to be enough because it was all she had to give. The child wasn't crying anymore. She was moving between consciousness and something else, her eyes rolling back slightly, her breathing becoming shallow. Aria knew shock when she saw it. She had seen shock in the mirror every morning for 8 years. She wrapped the girl tighter against her chest and began to walk through the blizzard. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew that staying here meant the child would die, and walking meant the child had a chance, even if that chance was small, even if that chance was foolish, even if that chance meant Aria herself would probably freeze before morning. The wind screamed around her as she moved deeper into the storm, carrying the child toward whatever came next. Behind her, the trash bin sat empty in the darkness, its lid hanging open like a mouth about to scream. The city was about to break open. The alarm screamed at 5:27 a.m., and Aria Sinclair's eyes snapped open in the darkness. Her converted closet in the Whitfield mansion was 7 feet by 4 feet, with no window, no ventilation, just the sound of her own breathing and the hum of a single bare light bulb that never quite turned off. She lay on a mattress she kept on the floor because there was no room for a bed frame, and she dressed in the dark so the light wouldn't bleed under the door and wake the house. Her clothes came from a plastic storage bin, 3 pairs of black pants, 5 white shirts, 1 cardigan with a button missing, socks with holes in 3 of them. She pulled them on slowly, her movements careful and practiced, the kind of movements a person makes when they have learned not to disturb the air around them. By 5:16 a.m., she was in the Whitfield kitchen. The marble counters stretched like a frozen lake, and the morning light came through floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the San Francisco skyline burning gold in the distance. Aria moved through this space like a ghost, quiet and faithful and invisible. She cracked eggs into a copper bowl, 6 of them, and whisked them with mechanical precision while the coffee brewed. Emma would be down in 20 minutes. Emma was 6 years old and the only warm thing in this cold house, and Aria had learned a long time ago not to love her too much because things you love can be taken away. The child appeared at 6:07 a.m., barefoot and still half asleep, her blonde hair tangled like she had been dreaming something complicated. She was wearing a nightgown that probably cost more than Aria's monthly wages, and she went directly to Aria's lap without saying anything. This was their ritual. Emma sat down and Aria held her, just held her while the eggs finished cooking and the kitchen filled with the smell of butter and salt. "Morning, sweet girl," Aria whispered, pressing her cheek into the child's hair. Emma didn't answer. She just curled deeper against Aria's chest, the way a child does when she is still half inside her dreams and doesn't want to come all the way out. Aria's hand moved in slow circles on the girl's back, and she let herself have this moment, just this one moment, before the house woke up and demanded that Aria become something less than human. Diana Whitfield arrived in the kitchen at 6:23 a.m. like a blade cutting through silence. She was 42 years old but moved like a woman who had never known tiredness, her cashmere robe the color of winter clouds, her perfume arriving in the room before she did. She did not acknowledge Aria's existence. She spoke to the space above Aria's head, as if addressing the wall itself. "The playroom is a disaster. Fix it before I get back from my yoga." Diana's voice was like ice water poured down someone's throat. "And Emma has piano at 3 o'clock. Do not be late like last time." Last time was embarrassing. "Yes," Aria said quietly. Emma climbed out of her lap, and Aria pulled away from the child's warmth. The moment was over. It always was. Diana poured coffee into a white porcelain cup and left without drinking it. The cup sat on the counter, a statement of careless waste that made something twist in Aria's chest. She had $78 to her name. $78 to the person who could not even finish a cup of coffee. At 12:15 p.m., during her 15-minute lunch break, Aria sat on her mattress in the closet and pulled the foreclosure notice from the inside of her pillowcase where she kept it hidden. The paper was soft from being unfolded and refolded so many times, and the numbers swam in front of her eyes because she had done the math at least 200 times and the answer never changed. $125,000. Due in 3 days. Her grandmother's house. The only thing left of her family, the only place on earth where she had ever felt safe. And in 3 days, the bank would take it. A company would auction it to people who did not care that her grandmother had planted roses in the front garden. They would tear up the roses. They would repaint the walls. They would make it into something that had nothing to do with love. She counted the cash again. $43 in her checking account, she knew because she had checked it this morning on the computer at the library. $35 hidden in the zipper pocket of her jacket. $78 total. Not enough to stop a hurricane. Not enough to hold back the tide. Aria folded the notice back into its small square of desperation and returned it to her pillowcase. She had 7 minutes left of her lunch break, and she spent them staring at the wall, doing nothing, being nothing, waiting to resume her cage. The restaurant was called Mathio's, and it sat 3 blocks from the waterfront in a neighborhood where the old warehouses were becoming galleries and the galleries were becoming impossible. Aria arrived at 5:58 p.m., just before her shift began. She had worked 2 jobs for 18 months, and her body had learned to run on 4 hours of sleep and the protein she could steal from the restaurant dumpster. No one noticed a thin woman eating yesterday's lasagna behind the building. No one counted the missing portions as long as they did not add up to anything noticeable. Douglas Hale was waiting for her in the walk-in freezer at 7:45 p.m. He was the manager, mid-40s, thick across the shoulders and thicker across the middle, with cold eyes that did not blink the way normal eyes did. He wore suits that cost more than everything Aria owned, and he had learned that money gave him permission to touch things without asking. The freezer hummed around them. Frost covered the metal walls like a disease. "You were short $40 on your register last night," Douglas said. His voice was like a door closing. Aria knew the math. She had counted 3 times. The register had balanced perfectly. Douglas had taken the $40 from the drawer at the end of her shift, and now he was standing in front of her with his hands in his pockets, teaching her that the truth did not matter. "I can pay it back," Aria said. Her voice was barely a whisper, like a candle in the wind. "Can you?" Douglas moved closer. His breath smelled like alcohol and the expensive cologne he wore. "Or should we discuss this somewhere more private? My office has a better lock." Aria shook her head. She did not move. She did not speak. She just stood there while the cold pressed against her skin and his shadow swallowed the light. Douglas smiled. "I thought so. Get back to work." She left the freezer, and her hands shook so badly she could barely carry the water glasses to table 7. The customers at table 7 did not notice her hands. They never noticed anything about her. That night, at 11:16 p.m., after her shift ended, Aria walked home through the darkness. The city was loud with Friday night voices, people celebrating things, people with money and plans and futures. She moved between them like a ghost, unseen, unheard, unremarkable. In her closet at the Whitfield mansion, at 12:34 a.m., Aria changed into her sleeping clothes and caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror she kept hidden in her jacket pocket. She turned slightly and lifted her shirt. In the dim light, she could see them 8 years of scars running in every direction like a map of hell. Some were thin lines. Some were thick and purple. Some had faded to the color of old bruises. Each one was a conversation with Douglas Hale that had escalated beyond talking. Each one was a moment when she had considered reporting him and then remembered that she had nowhere else to go. She covered the scars quickly and lay down on her mattress. The Whitfield house was silent above her, all that wealth and marble pressing down like the weight of a coffin lid. Emma slept 3 floors above, dreaming whatever 6-year-old girls dream. Diana slept in a bed the size of Aria's entire closet. And in the darkness of her converted room, Aria lay still and waited for morning to come again. But what she did not know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow night, a man called Aleandro Caruso would be driving through the San Francisco warehouse district at 9:53 p.m. She did not know that the storm would be waiting. She did not know that a trash bin behind a locked gate would hold something that would change the entire course of every life connected to her. The wind picked up outside as midnight passed. The city was still and sleeping, but somewhere in the darkness, fate was moving like a blade wrapped in ice, cutting toward the moment when everything would shatter open. The wind cut through the San Francisco warehouse district like a blade wrapped in ice, carrying snow so thick it swallowed the streetlights. Aria Sinclair walked with her shoulders hunched, her threadbare coat offering nothing against the cold, her breath visible in small clouds that disappeared into the darkness. It was 12:48 a.m. She had just finished her shift at Rossetti's restaurant, her feet aching, her hands raw from washing dishes in scalding water, her apron still damp with spilled coffee and regret. 6 blocks to the bus stop. She had calculated it 100 times. 6 blocks, 43 minutes if the buses were running, which they weren't, which meant walking another 3 miles to the apartment she shared with 2 other people in a neighborhood that smelled like wet concrete and broken dreams. She had $78 in her coat pocket. $78. That was everything. The foreclosure notice was folded into her bra, pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. 3 days. The bank had given her 3 days to come up with $125,000, or the small house her grandmother had left her would belong to strangers. The house where she had learned to read, where her grandmother had taught her to make pasta from scratch, where love had been measured in small kindnesses and warm meals. Now it was just a number on a piece of paper and a countdown that felt like a death sentence. She heard the shouting before she saw the alley. Voices, male and low, the kind of voices that made something primal curl up inside your chest. A crack like a fist on bone. A man's voice, hoarse, "Please, I was just looking for information." Another voice, colder, "You don't look for information from the Caruso family without permission." Aria should have kept walking. Every piece of sense she possessed screamed at her to keep her head down, to pretend she heard nothing, to get to that bus stop and disappear into the grid of the city where nobody asked questions. But something inside her broke open like an egg left too long in the sun, and she found herself walking toward the alley instead of away from it. The scene froze in her mind like a photograph. 3 men in dark coats, expensive wool that cost more than everything she owned, stood in a semicircle around a 4th man who was on his knees, blood streaming from his temple. The man's hands were raised. His face was turned away, but she could see his shoulders shaking. And in the hands of the men in the coats, the dull metal gleam of guns. One of the men looked at her and laughed. It was a sound without humor, like a drawer being opened in an empty house. "You lost, lady," he said. Aria's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "Leave him alone." The man laughed again. He turned fully toward her, and she saw his face, ordinary, unmemorable, the kind of face you wouldn't notice in a crowd, which made the cruelty in his eyes more terrible somehow. "What are you going to do about it, little waitress?" She didn't move. "I said leave him alone." They advanced on her together, and she didn't run. Later, she would not be able to explain why. 8 years of silence, 8 years of taking it, of being invisible, of accepting that the world was designed for people like her to disappear quietly. Not tonight. Not to someone else. Hands grabbed her, shoved her against the brick wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, but she fought back anyway, landing one punch that connected with soft tissue before they pinned her arms. The man on his knees scrambled away, disappeared into the storm like a ghost dissolving into fog. Then a voice cut through the wind like steel. "Let her go." 3 words. That was all. But the men released her instantly, their bodies going rigid with something that looked like fear. Aria pushed off the wall, gasping, and that's when she saw him step from the shadows across the street. He was tall, 6'2", maybe taller, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of empires. His coat was cashmere, black, worth more than a year of her salary, and it hung on him like he didn't notice the cold existed. His hair was dark, silver threading through at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a storm about to break. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, white against olive skin, and he wore a gold watch on his left wrist that caught the streetlight and threw it back like a blade. The men in dark coats melted into the blizzard without another word. He approached slowly, hands visible, and the way he moved told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man he was. Each step deliberate, controlled, the way a general surveys a battlefield. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, with an accent that curved around the edges of certain words. Aria's legs were shaking so badly she wasn't sure they would hold her. "I'm very tired." She tried to stand on her own, stumbled, and he caught her, his hands gentle but firm on her elbows, steadying her like she was something fragile that might break. Up close, she could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was assessing her, measuring her, trying to figure out what she was and why she had stepped between him and armed men with nothing but anger and a threadbare coat. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She didn't answer. He didn't push. "There's a storm coming," he said. "A bad one. The buses stopped running at midnight. You're not walking 6 blocks in this cold." "I have to get home," Aria said. "I have to work tomorrow morning. The Whitfields, they're very particular about." "You're coming with me." It wasn't a request. His car was 2 blocks away, and the storm had worsened, snow falling so thick it had erased the distinction between street and sidewalk. They were walking, or she was trying to walk, and he was partially supporting her weight without making it obvious, when she heard something that made her stop dead. A sound so small it almost disappeared into the wind. A whimper. A child's whimper. She held up one hand. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" he said. She pulled away from him and followed the sound to a metal dumpster, the kind the restaurants used for their garbage. She yanked open the lid, and the smell hit first, rotten old food and something else, something wrong, a staleness that meant whatever was inside had been there for hours. The small girl was curled in the corner, her designer coat soaked, her lips the color of winter, barely conscious. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Her skin was so pale it was almost translucent. Aria didn't hesitate. She reached down, lifted the child into her arms, wrapped her in her own coat. The girl weighed almost nothing, like she was already fading, already becoming a ghost. The man, the dangerous man with the scar and the storm-colored eyes, closed the distance in 3 strides. He looked at the child's face, and something shifted in his entire body. His breath caught. His hands reached out, shaking. "Sophia," he whispered. His voice broke like an old floorboard under too much weight. He took his daughter from Aria's arms carefully, reverently, like she was made of spun glass. Sophia's eyes flickered open for a moment. "Papa." Her voice was so small. "I'm here, Principessa, I'm here," he said, and he was crying. This dangerous man with cold eyes and a scar was crying, holding his child like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Aria stepped back, her job finished, ready to disappear into the storm. But Sophia's tiny hand reached out. "Cold," the girl whispered. "I know, sweetheart," Aria said. "We're going to get you warm." Aleandro looked at Aria, and something in his expression shifted. "Come with us." "Please." She should have said no. She should have walked away. But she nodded. The mountain lodge appeared through the blizzard like a fortress, all glass and dark wood, lights glowing in every window, a fireplace visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, flames roaring like a living thing. Wind howled against the glass. Snow piled against the doors. The moment they stepped inside, the warmth hit like a physical force. A doctor was already there. Rocco had called ahead, had explained the emergency in quiet, urgent Italian that Aria didn't understand. The examination took 10 minutes. Sophia was hypothermic, her pulse weak, but she would recover. She needed warmth, rest, watching. Aria helped settle Sophia in bed, sat beside her, stroked her damp hair. Sophia wouldn't let go of her hand, even as sleep pulled her under. Aleandro stood in the doorway, watching, and his expression was unreadable. Downstairs, in the kitchen at 2 a.m., Aleandro poured tea. The fireplace crackled. Outside, the storm raged on, and Aria realized she was trapped here. The roads were sealed, the snow was still falling, and there was nowhere to go. She sat across from him at a table that could have seated 20 people. He set the tea in front of her carefully. "Tell me why you stepped into that alley tonight," he said. She was quiet for a long time. The sound of the wind filled the silence, pressing against the windows like something trying to get in. "Because I know what it's like when nobody helps," she finally said. "I work 2 jobs. Nanny during the day at the Whitfield house, restaurant at night. I sleep in a closet, an actual closet, the linen storage converted into a bedroom. I have $78 and $125,000 in debt." Her voice cracked. "My grandmother raised me. She died 2 years ago. I took a loan to pay for her medical bills. I can't make the payments. The foreclosure notice came yesterday. I have 3 days to find $125,000 or I lose the only home I've ever known. She looked at him, and her eyes were dry but her voice was broken like glass. So when I saw those men hurting someone, I thought, at least I can stop it once. At least once, someone doesn't have to take it alone. Aleandro reached across the table and took her hand. His hands were warm, calloused, strong. Rocco and Pietro, standing guard by the kitchen door, exchanged a look neither had seen in 15 years. Their boss never touched anyone. Not unless it was to give an order or inflict punishment. "You're not alone anymore," he said. She pulled her hand back. "Why would you help me? I'm nobody. I'm just a person in a stained uniform who happened to be in the wrong place." "You saved my daughter's life," he said. His voice was steady, absolute. "You stood between armed men with nothing but courage. You're not nobody. Never say that again." Her phone buzzed. A text from Douglas Hale, her manager at the restaurant, the man who had made the last 8 years a slow erosion of her spirit. "Where are you? You missed your shift. You're fired. Unless you want me to tell the police you stole from the register. I'll destroy you." Another text, worse, "and I'll make sure the Whitfields know what kind of person is watching their daughter." Aria's face went white. She showed him the messages. Aleandro read them, jaw tightening. "Who is Douglas Hale?" She explained. 8 years. 8 years of harassment, stolen wages, threats that kept her quiet, kept her compliant, kept her small. She didn't tell him about the scars yet. Not yet. At 6 a.m., another phone call. Diana Whitfield, her voice cold and calculated. "Where are you?" "Emma is crying. You abandoned your post. I don't pay you to have emergencies. You have until noon to return or you're terminated. No reference. No final paycheck. And I'll make sure every family in San Francisco knows you're unreliable." Click. Aria stared at the phone, and something inside her crumbled. She started crying, quietly, trying to hide it, but Aleandro heard and crossed the distance in 3 strides. "Who's Emma?" he asked. "The little girl I nanny. She's 6 years old. She has nightmares. I'm the only one who can calm her down. Her parents don't notice. She climbs into my lap every morning and tells me her dreams." Aria's voice broke. "She's not mine, but she feels like mine. I can't lose her. I can't let her think I abandon her." Aleandro sat beside her on the couch. The fireplace cast shadows across his face, making him look older, worn, like a man carrying weight nobody else could see. "I grew up in a one-room apartment," he said quietly. "My father was violent. Broke my arm when I was 7 because I didn't finish dinner. Broke my mother's jaw when I was 9. She died when I was 12. After that, it was just him and me." Aria looked at him. The scar on his face took on new meaning. "I left at 16, he continued. Slept in shelters, stole food, clawed my way out of nothing. I swore no child would ever suffer like I did. That's why I built what I built. Power means protection. But when Sophia was taken, I realized power means nothing if the person you love is gone." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw past the dangerous man to the boy who had suffered, who had survived, who had built an empire out of rage and grief. "You saved her," he said. "You saved the only thing that matters." Outside, the storm raged on. Diana Whitfield's fingers moved across her phone screen with the precision of a surgeon wielding a blade. The morning light cut through her penthouse windows, casting sharp shadows across her face as she composed the post that would destroy Aria Sinclair. She sat in her silk robe, coffee untouched beside her, surrounded by the kind of luxury that only old money could afford, furniture that cost more than Aria's entire life. The post went live at 8:24 a.m. "I regret to inform my San Francisco circle that our former household staff member has been terminated for gross misconduct. Unreliable. Unprofessional. Potentially dangerous around children. Beware, this woman may apply to work in your homes. Protect your families. Within minutes, the comments poured in like a flood. Wealthy socialites Diana knew from galas and charity benefits typed their outrage. One woman wrote, "Thank you for the warning. We've had issues with her too." Another fired her immediately after seeing this. Better safe than sorry. A third, "She seemed nice but clearly has a criminal mind." Every single comment was a lie wrapped in concern. Diana hit share, and the post went viral across San Francisco's exclusive social networks. 40,000 views within an hour. By noon, it had spread to neighborhood apps, nanny services, employment platforms. Aria Sinclair's face became synonymous with untrustworthiness. Then Diana did something even more calculated. She opened her email and began typing messages to every nanny agency in Northern California. Each one identical, each one devastating. Aria Sinclair is no longer employed with our family. We cannot in good conscience recommend her for future positions. She is unreliable, dishonest, and we have concerns about her stability. Please remove her from your database immediately. She signed each one with her full name, her address, her credentials as a Whitfield. Each signature was a loaded gun pointed at Aria's remaining chances. At the lodge, 300 miles away in the mountains, Aria's phone buzzed. She was sitting by the fireplace, finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. Sophia was asleep in the guest room. Aleandro was in his office on a call. The storm outside had softened from apocalyptic to merely merciless. For one stolen moment, Aria had let her guard down. The first notification hit like a punch. Diana Whitfield's post. The comments. The shares. Aria scrolled through them, her hands beginning to shake, the phone growing heavier with each word she read. She didn't recognize half these people, but they all recognized her as a problem. As a threat. As nobody worth protecting. Then the emails started. Aria Sinclair has been terminated from our employment. Copy. Paste. Copy. Paste. One after another, landing in her inbox like grenades. She was still reading when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Aria? It was James Chen from the West Side Nanny Service, the agency that had placed her with the Whitfields 8 years ago. I need to ask you some questions about the allegations. What allegations? Her voice came out broken. Diana Whitfield sent us something very serious. She says you stole from them. That you were inappropriate with the child. Aria, did you? She hung up. The next call came from Linda Park, who ran the Peninsula Childcare Collective. We're removing you from our active placement list pending an investigation. Don't contact families you've worked with. That's our policy. Then silence. Aria sat in that silence, phone dead in her lap, and realized that Diana Whitfield had just erased her. Not with one blow, but with 1,000 small cuts. Each share, each comment, each email a drop of poison spreading through the only professional world Aria had ever known. Aleandro appeared in the doorway. He'd finished his call and came looking for her, but what he found was a woman dissolving. Who did this? His voice was quiet, which meant it was dangerous. Aria couldn't speak. She just handed him the phone. He read for 10 seconds, and then the phone went flying across the room. Not in rage, but in something worse, in the kind of controlled fury that only comes from someone who has built an entire empire on making certain that people like Diana Whitfield understood their place in the world. Let me handle this, he said. You can't. Aria's laugh was hollow, fractured. She has power. Money. Connections. She's been on the boards of 6 charities. Her family donates millions. I'm just... You're under my protection now, Aleandro interrupted. His voice was like thunder rolling across a darkened sky. That means something in this city. That means more than she has. But Aria didn't believe him. How could she? Diana Whitfield had just proven that the internet didn't care about truth. It cared about narrative. And the narrative was already written. Aria Sinclair was dangerous. That same morning, 3 hours earlier, Douglas Hale had driven to the Whitfield mansion with a purpose. He parked his black Mercedes in the circular driveway, the morning mist still clinging to the San Francisco hills behind him. The mansion rose before him like a fortress, white stone, arched windows, the kind of house that announced power before you ever stepped inside. Diana met him at the door wearing linen pants and a cashmere sweater that cost more than Aria's monthly rent. Her face arranged itself into a concerned smile. "Douglas. Come in, please. I'm so glad you called." He settled into her living room, on a sofa that probably had a longer pedigree than most people's entire families, and he began to speak with the careful precision of someone who had practiced this exact performance many times before. "I have concerns about Aria Sinclair," he said. "Professional concerns. As her former employer, I wanted to make sure you were aware of her patterns of behavior." Diana leaned forward, suddenly interested. Hale pulled out his phone and showed her fabricated documents, time-stamped screenshots of supposed theft reports, a fake police incident from 3 years ago, medical records that didn't belong to Aria but had her name photoshopped across the top. Everything meticulously crafted. Everything a lie. Diana didn't ask questions. She didn't ask for verification. She simply accepted each image, each false piece of evidence, and nodded as though she'd known this about Aria all along. "Thank you for telling me," Diana said, her voice steady, practiced. "I'll take care of it immediately." Hale left the mansion knowing that he'd just lit a fire that would burn Aria Sinclair to ash. By noon, Aria's text notification arrived like a death sentence. "Do not return to this house. Your belongings will be donated to charity. You are banned from seeing Emma. Effective immediately. Diana Whitfield." Then, 5 minutes later, another message. "Emma asked for you this morning. I told her you didn't care about her anymore. She cried for an hour." Aria read that final message 17 times. She was standing at the window of the lodge when the sun finally broke through the storm clouds. The rain had stopped an hour before, and now the mountains were emerging from the mist like they were being born all over again. But Aria didn't see beauty. She saw a world that had just closed every door she'd ever opened. She walked outside in her thin coat, phone in shaking hands, reading Diana's messages over and over like they might change if she looked at them enough times. 8 years. 8 years of getting up at 5 a.m. to make Emma breakfast. 8 years of braiding that little girl's hair, of sitting with her through nightmares, of being the only person in Emma's world who paid attention to her. 8 years of loving a child who wasn't hers, knowing she never could be. And now Emma was alone again. Aria's chest was so tight she couldn't breathe. The icy rain that followed the blizzard soaked through her coat, through the layers of clothing underneath, all the way down to the scars that still ran across her back and shoulders in a map of everything she'd survived. The wind cut through the mountain pass with the kind of cold that makes you understand why people stop fighting. She looked at the dark forest beyond the lodge, at the trees that disappeared into shadow, and she thought about how easy it would be to walk in there and never come back. No more fighting. No more losing. No more watching people she loved slip away because she didn't have enough money, enough power, enough of anything to hold them. Her internal voice whispered what everyone had ever told her: maybe they're right. Maybe you are nobody. Maybe you should stop. She was so tired. 8 years of abuse, of silence, of taking punches both literal and financial. $50,000 in debt for a surgery her grandmother needed before she died. $125,000 in foreclosure notices. $78 to her name. And now the one pure thing in her life, a little girl with nightmares, was being told that Aria had stopped loving her. Maybe it would be easier just to disappear into these trees. Then through the lodge window, she saw Sophia. The child was sleeping on the couch, curled into herself like a question mark, the way she slept every night. Sophia, who had been thrown into a trash bin by her own father. Sophia, who didn't speak for the first 3 days after Aria rescued her? Sophia, who had started drawing pictures again this week, pictures of mountains and sky and a woman with long hair holding her hand. Aria took one breath. The mountain air was so cold it felt like breathing fire. Then another breath. Then she walked back inside. 4 days later, at 4:38 in the morning, Douglas Hale was turning the key in the lock of his restaurant, preparing for the morning shift. The kitchen smelled like yesterday's grease and floor cleaner. The dining room chairs were still stacked on tables. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. He didn't hear the FBI agents until they were already inside. 12 men in black tactical gear moved like ghosts through the doors, 4 securing the exits, 2 clearing the kitchen, 6 advancing on Hale with weapons drawn and faces hidden behind tactical masks. Freeze! FBI! Hands where we can see them. Hale's face went white. The coffee pot slipped from his fingers and shattered on the tile floor. The sound echoed through the empty restaurant like a gunshot. What is this? I didn't. The lead agent held up a warrant, the paper trembling slightly in the morning light that was just beginning to creep through the windows. Douglas Michael Hale. You're under arrest for labor trafficking, wage theft, sexual harassment, assault, extortion, and racketeering. You can't prove anything, Hale said, but his voice had already broken. We have 8 years of financial records, the agent said quietly. Surveillance footage from 43 cameras. Testimony from 43 victims. Aria Sinclair provided detailed accounts of every threat, every stolen wage, every time you put your hands on her. She wasn't your only victim, Mr. Hale. She was just the one who had finally had enough. Hale's knees gave out. His entire body began to tremble like a cornered animal backed into the last corner of its cage. Please, he whispered. Please, I'll cooperate. I'll tell you anything. I have a family. I have? Save it for the prosecutor, the agent said. They cuffed him, and the metal clicked shut like the sound of a prison door closing. They led him out of the restaurant as the morning broke fully across San Francisco, and every news camera in the city was waiting outside. Aleandro had made certain of it. Hale's face was broadcast across every news channel by 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., the prosecutor announced, federal charges, 40 years minimum, no possibility of parole. 40 years in a federal cage. 40 years knowing that the women he'd hurt were walking free while he rotted. Justice is not death, too quick, too easy, too merciful. At the same hour that Hale was being led into a holding cell, a lawyer knocked on Diana Whitfield's penthouse door. She answered in her silk robe, coffee finely in hand, watching her social media numbers climb with satisfaction. The lawyer was young, professional, dressed in the kind of suit that spoke of expensive education and powerful clients. Mrs. Whitfield. He handed her a thick folder. Lawsuit for wrongful termination, defamation, emotional distress, and abuse of power. You have 24 hours to comply with the terms inside. Diana's laugh died the moment she opened the folder and saw one name at the bottom in bold letters, Aleandro Caruso. The lawyer spoke in a voice that was polite but absolute. You will issue a public apology on every platform where you posted those accusations. You will delete all posts. You will provide a written reference letter stating that Aria Sinclair is an exceptional childcare provider. And you will pay $125,000 in damages. Absolutely not, Diana said. She's a liar. I have witnesses. I have? You have fabricated evidence, the lawyer interrupted. Which Aleandro Caruso has already given to the FBI. You have 24 hours, Mrs. Whitfield. Or we file this in court, and Mr. Caruso will ensure that every society family in San Francisco knows you fired the nanny who saved a child's life. Your social circle will remember you as the woman who tried to destroy someone good. The lawyer placed a business card on her marble coffee table and walked out. Diana didn't move for 30 minutes. By noon, she posted a public apology. By 1 p.m., she deleted every post. By 2:19 p.m., a glowing reference letter appeared on her official letterhead. And at exactly 3 p.m., $125,000 was deposited into Aria's bank account. Her grandmother's house was saved. The foreclosure notice that had lived in Aria's pocket for 18 months could finally be crumpled up and thrown away. That evening, Aleandro arranged for Aria to see Emma one last time. He drove her to the Whitfield mansion in his black Range Rover, and when they pulled up to the circular driveway, Emma was waiting on the front steps with Diana hovering just behind her, unable now to prevent this reunion without destroying what remained of her reputation. The little girl saw Aria and ran. "You came back. You came back." Emma's voice was like bells, like everything bright that still existed in the world. Aria caught her, held her against her chest, and felt 8 years of love pour out of her like blood from a wound. "I'm so sorry I was gone," she whispered into Emma's hair. "I never wanted to leave you. Never." "Mommy said you didn't care," Emma said, pulling back just enough to look at Aria's face. "But I knew she was lying. I knew you'd come back. You always come back." They sat together on the steps as the San Francisco evening settled around them, the fog rolling in from the bay, and Aria made Emma a promise. Letters. Regular letters. And when Emma was older, they would see each other again. As much as possible. "Promise?" Emma asked. "I promise," Aria said. When Aria walked out of the Whitfield mansion for the last time, Emma waved from the front step, her small hand moving back and forth, until Aria turned the corner and couldn't see her anymore. What Aria didn't know was that Aleandro had already arranged for a college trust fund to be established in Emma's name. What she didn't know was that Diana Whitfield's social circle had already begun to turn on her, quietly, the way the wealthy do, no longer inviting her to galas, removing her from charity boards, treating her like the woman who tried to destroy someone good. She had become nobody. Exactly like she'd tried to make Aria. But the storm had passed, and Aria was still standing. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and melted butter when Aria's hand stopped shaking. 2 weeks had passed since the federal agents came at dawn, since Douglas Hale's face went grey as they read him his rights, since Diana Whitfield's social circle turned on her like a pack of wolves sensing weakness. Now, in her grandmother's house, saved, somehow, from that foreclosure notice that had haunted her for 3 years, Aria stood at the counter where Nonna had taught her to bake when she was 7 years old. The kitchen had sunlight in it. Real sunlight, streaming through windows that no longer had bars of ice on them. She ran her palm across the granite countertop, and something inside her chest finally loosened. The scars on her back, mapped across 8 years of Douglas's hands and his promises to destroy her if she ever tried to leave, had begun to fade. Not gone. Fading. A knock on the door came at 3:13 in the afternoon. Aria's body tensed, old habit, the one that made her jump at every sound, but she made herself walk toward it slowly. Aleandro stood on the porch with Sophia at his side, the 5-year-old girl pressing herself against his leg. When Sophia saw Aria, she broke free and ran. "You came back. You came back." The child's voice was like bells, like music after a lifetime of silence. Aria caught her and held her against her chest. Sophia weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird you could crush without meaning to. "Hi, sweetheart," Aria whispered into her hair. "I missed you so much." "Aleandro said you saved my life," Sophia said matter-of-factly, the way children declare simple truths. "He said you pulled me out when I couldn't breathe." Aleandro watched from the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his dark eyes burning with something Aria had learned to recognize as gratitude. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than her entire annual salary under Diana Whitfield, but there was something almost vulnerable in how he stood there, waiting. "Come inside," Aria said. "Both of you." They moved to the living room. Sophia climbed into Aria's lap and started telling her about school, about the cookies they'd baked, about a friend named Marcus who put glue in his own hair by accident. Aleandro sat across from them, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked almost uncertain. Like a man who had commanded armies for 15 years and suddenly didn't know the rules anymore. "I have a proposition," he said when Sophia had exhausted her news and was playing quietly with a stuffed rabbit Aria kept on the shelf. Not money. I know you'd refuse money. Aria felt her spine straighten. What kind of proposition? Sophia needs someone she trusts. Someone brave. Someone who has proven they will fight for children like they matter. He paused, and his voice dropped. Be her nanny. Live in the guest house on my estate. Set your own hours. The salary is $120,000 a year. The number hung in the air like a weight that might crush her. Aria had lived on $12,000 a year for 8 years. $120,000 was a different world entirely. Why, she asked, and the question came out small, fragile. Why me? Because you saved her life. Because you saved mine. Aleandro leaned forward, his forearms resting on his thighs. In 15 years of commanding men, I have never met anyone as strong as you. And because, his voice softened until it was barely audible. Because I want you to stay. Aria felt Sophia's small hand squeeze hers. The child was watching the two adults with the solemn focus children give to important moments, the moments they know will change something. You saved me too, Aria said quietly. The foreclosure. Hale. Diana, I couldn't have survived it alone. You survived 8 years alone, Aleandro said. You saved yourself. I just made sure the people who hurt you faced consequences. We saved each other, Aria said. It wasn't a question. Aleandro nodded slowly, and something like peace settled into the lines of his face. We did. She said yes before fear could talk her out of it. The guest house had 3 bedrooms and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over gardens Sophia was already planning to destroy. Aria moved in on a Tuesday morning, carrying a single suitcase and a cardboard box of books. When Aleandro left her to settle in, she stood alone in the largest bedroom she'd ever had and cried, not from despair, but from relief so profound it felt like drowning in reverse. She spent her days with Sophia. They painted with watercolors and made up stories about dragons who were actually just very grumpy cats. They read picture books and practiced writing letters. Aria taught her the names of constellations and showed her how to make bread rise. Slowly, in the safety of these routines, the tightness in her chest eased. She laughed again. Real laughter, not the careful kind she'd learned to perform for tips. One evening, 6 weeks into this new life, Aleandro joined them for dinner. They ate pasta that the estate cook had prepared, and Sophia talked the entire meal about a field trip to the aquarium scheduled for Thursday. By the time they finished dessert, the girl had fallen asleep, her head tilted back against the couch cushion, her breathing deep and even. Aria carefully moved her, arranging pillows beneath her head, pulling a cashmere blanket, worth more than anything Aria had ever owned, over her small frame. When she returned to the living room, Aleandro was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You are good at this, he said. Caring for people. Aria sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. I spent 8 years being told I was worthless. It is strange to be treated like I matter. You matter to Sophia, Aleandro said. You matter to me. She looked at his hands, scarred, capable, hands that had done terrible things and saved her life. I never thought I would feel safe again, she whispered. But here, with you, with Sophia, I do. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. His grip was gentle, almost reverent, like she was something precious that might break. You are safe, he said. I swear it. They sat in silence while the fireplace crackled, while Sophia slept peacefully nearby, while 2 people who had clawed their way out of different kinds of darkness began to understand that they might build something new together. 6 months later, Aria stood in her grandmother's fully renovated house, every room now filled with light, every corner carrying the weight of resurrection. The living room held 12 women, all of them with the same look she'd worn for 8 years. Fear. Exhaustion. The terrible knowledge that no one was coming to save them. She'd started the support group quietly, with Aleandro's funding and her own insistence on running it. Called it the House of Hope because every woman deserved to know the thing hope looked like when it finally arrived. How did you get out? The youngest one asked, a girl barely 22 with bruises still purple along her collarbones. Aria met her eyes. I stopped believing I deserved it. I stopped thinking I was alone. And when someone offered help, I took it, even though I was terrified. What if nobody helps? The girl asked. Then you help yourself. You fight. You survive. And one day you realize you are not the person they tried to break. Aria paused. You are stronger. A knock interrupted them. Emma appeared in the doorway, now 7 years old, carrying a drawing. Diana had been forced by the court settlement to allow supervised visits. The lawsuit Aleandro's lawyers had filed had been so comprehensive it left her with nothing but her humiliation. Emma ran to Aria. I made this for you. It's me and you and Sophia. We are all heroes. Aria held the drawing, 3 figures, rendered in crayon, standing in a circle with their hands joined. She hugged the child against her chest and felt 8 years of accumulated love pour out of her like light. That evening, Aria returned to Aleandro's estate as the sun turned the sky orange and gold. Sophia was in the kitchen, flour dusting her small hands and her father's expensive suit. We made cookies, Sophia announced. Aleandro said when you cook with people you love, it makes the food taste like happiness. Aria looked at the man who had been a merciless mafia boss, now wearing an apron that said "Kiss the Cook" and covered in evidence of his failure to bake properly. Something warm expanded in her chest. You baked? I am full of surprises, Aleandro said, his mouth tilting into a smile she'd learned to recognize as real. They sat together, Aria, Aleandro, Sophia, eating slightly burnt cookies and drinking milk, talking about tomorrow. Sophia fell asleep in Aria's lap around 8 o'clock, her small body going boneless with the ease of a child who had learned safety. Aleandro carried her to bed, and when he returned, he sat beside Aria on the couch, maintaining that careful distance that had become both a question and a promise. You changed everything, he said quietly. The night you stepped into that alley, you changed my life. You changed mine too, Aria said. You gave me back my grandmother's house. You gave me back myself. I spent 15 years building walls, Aleandro said. You walked through them like they did not exist. Like they had never been there at all. Maybe they did not need to exist anymore, Aria replied. He kissed her forehead, a gesture so gentle it felt like prayer. For the first time in either of their lives, they felt completely at peace, 2 people made of survival, bound by shared darkness and mutual rescue, finally allowed to rest. The world will try to convince you that you are small, that your courage does not matter, that fighting back is pointless. But Aria proved them wrong. She stood between armed men and someone she did not know. She pulled a dying child from hell itself. She survived 8 years of abuse and came out stronger. Your past does not define you. Your scars do not diminish you. You are not alone. When you fight for someone else, when you choose courage over safety, you become exactly who you were meant to be. The storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think. If this story moved you, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because we have more stories coming of ordinary people choosing extraordinary courage. Drop a comment telling us what part hit you hardest. And remember, you are never as alone as you think. We will see you in the next video.